Hello and welcome to the ThreeView Mirror podcast, a podcast where we go back and relive some of the greatest moments and topics of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. We do this because once every week, one of us gets to be the host, and in doing so takes over the hosting duties, which include, I said duty, bringing 3 different topics to the table in that week. And the funnest part about it is neither you, the listener, nor the other 2 hosts know what those topics are going to be until they're revealed. And then finally, at the end of the episode, we'll ask or try to figure out what the connectivity was, because there is a hidden stream of something going between all 3 topics we come up with every week, and it's up to us to try to find out if we can figure it out. Now, today's host is none other than Chris Clews.
What's up, everybody? Get your decoder rings out because I have got a really, really good one for today, and it has nothing to do with duty or duties, as John said. My 3 topics are Mr. Miyagi, Sam Malone, and Mrs. Nora Bing.
Oh my gosh. I like that. I got something to say on all of that stuff. Very cool, man.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited about this one because it's the connection for me is the connection for me is something that when I look back at my youth, it's one of the pieces of pop culture that really drove my formative years.
So what do you think so far?
Wait, Nora Bing, would that be Chandler's? Is that her?
No, not Janice. No, it's.
Who is it? No, who am I thinking of then? Who's Nora Bing? Who's
Nora Bing was his mom.
Okay.
And not his dad, who became like a second mom, but the actual mom. Morgan Fairchild.
Actual mom, yes. Morgan Fairchild, yes.
All right, man, it's going to be a good one. This is the ThreeView Mirror podcast.
Okay, so before we get started, we jump into these 3 topics, and I try to stump both of you and the audience. Let's introduce ourselves. I am Chris Clews, better known as Chris Clews. I'm a keynote speaker and author. I focus on the work and life lessons that we can learn from the greatest decade for pop culture of all time, the 1980s.
And I am Rochelle O'Black, better known as Gen X Shell, across my social media accounts, including Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube. And if you want to just generally watch me be a goofball online, that's where you'll find me.
And I'm John Catrides, also known as Gen X Jono. You can find me in all the same places doing just a lot of stuff to do whatever I can do to keep the 70s, 80s, 90s alive in our memories as we get older and can't remember why we're in the kitchen. At the very least, we can continue to remember why we loved the way we were when we were growing up.
The way we were, wasn't that a...
The way we were.
Barbra Streisand, not Bette Midler, right? I thought it was Bette Midler, The Way We Were. Because
too soon. Too soon.
No, because actually a few days before we recorded this podcast, it was the anniversary. I think the 33rd or 34th anniversary of Beaches.
Beaches was 88.
Okay, so 35. So 35 years ago, 2 days ago. And I almost sent you the...
Can I admit to something?
Huh?
I was up alone, couldn't sleep, 2 a.m. 2 days ago. Somebody did send me the fact that and I watched it again. And I gotta tell you, it was as amazing and magical as I remembered.
Did somebody bring you a box of tissues to go with it too?
Dude, it was so sad. It's still to this day, like I was doing the ugly cry all by myself in my living room while everyone else was asleep.
I mean, listen, each his own.
Dude, it's horrible, though. You know how us guys get that lump in our throat and we're like, I'm not going to cry, I'm not going to cry. Even when we're alone, I'm like, I'm not giving into it. And all I kept thinking is I willingly did this to myself. But anyway, so there's that.
To each his own. You said amazing and magical about Beaches. I would say that about like Indiana Jones or Raiders of the Lost Ark. But hey,
Yeah, to each his own. You've never seen it. Give it a shot. We're gonna have like a screening. There's like this app that lets us watch a movie at the same time. We're gonna each come up with one, or maybe even the people watching can force us to watch one, and we'll go through the entire hour and a half or whatever watching, and kind of do like a mystery theater. What is it? Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Yes, that would be awesome. That would be awesome. I'll watch The Princess Bride with you.
There you go. We'll have to do that once a quarter or something. We'll throw something like that out there.
That would be a lot of fun. Maybe that's how you get. Maybe that's how you get me to watch Dirty Dancing. Who knows?
There you go. Definitely one.
If we do Dirty Dancing, I'll be like dancing the moves, poorly, mind you, but I'll be in the background like dancing the moves while they're doing it.
Doing that one. Okay, let's get started with our first segment here. Mr. Miyagi, one of my favorite characters in cinematic history, played by Pat Morita. And I always struggle with his last name. I don't know why. Anyway, we talked about him, I think, before when we were doing the Fonz and Happy Days and how he was on Happy Days as well. And so I want to focus on, obviously, Mr. Miyagi, but really the actor behind Mr. Miyagi. And the fact that he was, back in the 80s, a lot of the shows, they really relied on guest appearances. And so if we go back and we think about some of the people that popped up and showed up in a lot of the crossovers with the TV shows as well. So, for example, Pat Morita was in MASH, Sanford and Son. He was in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Marry the Children, The Odd Couple, so many more. The Love Boat, of course, because I think everybody in the 80s was on The Love Boat at some point. So what are your first thoughts of Mr. Miyagi, and more specifically Pat Morita, as well as the actor?
The first thought that comes to my mind is all of his little nuggets of information in The Karate Kid with the wax on, wax off. Those became part of our vernacular when we were in school. We would say those kind of things, paint the fence. And we can remember trying to paint the fence.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely permeated our culture. It became a way of just explaining things. And, the whole idea behind not knowing what you're doing, why you're doing it. And then all of a sudden there's the big reveal. He attacks Daniel-san. And, Danny's trying to protect himself. And he's like, wax on, do this. And it all made sense in the end. And there's the big reveal. Not necessarily unlike how at the end of this episode, hopefully we'll come to some greater understanding. But I love that. And I love that in the 80s, there were a lot of these movies that had the wise mentor. Whether it was Rocky and Burgess Meredith or, Pat Morita. The funny thing is a lot of those wise old mentors are younger then than we are now.
Even Burgess. How old
Maybe
was
not
he?
Burgess. Maybe not Burgess.
Like now you're hurting my feelings.
No, Burgess was like, no, not Burgess, but
okay.
Pat Morita during the Karate Kid was younger than Daniel is now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think Daniel is almost 60, 57, 58, something like that.
Yeah.
Because he was older than we thought he was even in that movie.
He always had a young look to his face, though. Very, very much so. Even as he aged into older bits and films, and even the reboot of The Karate Kid, what's it called? I can't even think of it at the moment.
Cobra Kai.
Cobra Kai.
Yeah.
Even in Cobra Kai, he still has a very youthful looking face.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned the wise mentor, and it was even in television as well. Like you look at shows, Robin Masters and Magnum PI, for example, right, was the kind of wise older mentor for Magnum. And whenever Magnum had an issue, he would go to Robin Masters, who was a lot of times to help him solve it, or he would find him meditating with his two dogs, Zeus and Apollo.
Do you mean Robin Masters or do you mean Higgins?
Well, Higgins, yeah.
Was Higgins Robin Masters?
I mean, that was the conversation, yeah.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that was one of the theories. I mean, they never really came out and said it, but I forgot about that part of Magnum, that he was like kind of, they're like, wait, maybe it's him. All right, that's cool. I totally forgot that.
Yeah. Yeah, and so when we think about also, again, I want to go back to Pat Morita because, we looked at Mr. Miyagi, and if you think about his path, there were some challenges that were in front of him as well. I mean, we get a little bit of his backstory from losing his wife, and here he is, kind of this incredibly skilled and incredibly intelligent man, but he is a handyman at a small apartment complex. And so, if you didn't know this about his background, he actually had spinal tuberculosis at age 2 years old and spent the better part of 9 years in hospitals and was told he would never walk, which is pretty incredible if you think about it.
Yeah, that is incredible.
Yeah, and then he actually worked the graveyard shift at a couple of companies, and he was a department head at Lockheed, and he just got kind of like sick and tired of he didn't want to do that anymore. He wanted to get into film. He was a stand-up comedian for a while, and his agent was Lenny Bruce's mom, actually. So he had a really interesting path to get to where he was with stardom, but we talked about some of the shows he was on. Welcome Back, Carter, Columbo, Green Acres. He was on Magnum PI, Man from Atlantis, Murder, She Wrote. And I have to throw this one in for John. He had a guest appearance on Family Matters with Urkel.
John's face, wait, for the listening audience, John's face just twisted up into this gnarly look of disgust because of his literal hatred for Urkel.
Dislike. Let's not go all the way.
Dislike.
Oh, you know what? He's a fictional character. I'm allowed to hate him. I hate him. I don't know if I brought this up during Happy Days or not with the Fonz episode that we did, but I was it might have only been a year or two ago that I realized that Pat Morita doesn't have an accent. Like, he was born and raised in California. He speaks English better than I do, more clear. And I was shocked. I saw an interview and it was the only interview I'd ever seen with him. And I really believed he had that accent because he had it as Arnold in Happy Days. He had it, all the way through. He's always had. I've never seen him anywhere without it. And I was like, wow, I was shocked.
So he had to put on an accent for his culture in order to be believable at that time, which and you could probably comment on that, if he had to put on an Asian accent in order to be believable as an Asian. And that's kind of it's a little, I don't really know what to say about that.
Well, I mean, what would the Karate Kid have been like if the wise old sage that, was from Okinawa didn't have that accent? It would not have played the same way. I'm not trying to say right, wrong, or otherwise, but it wouldn't have worked.
Right.
Yeah, and did you know that he was nominated? I didn't know this, by the way, with all the stuff I know about 80s movies, that he was actually nominated for Best Supporting Actor for playing Mr. Miyagi in The Karate Kid. I did not know that until I was doing a little bit of research.
For an Oscar?
Yeah, for an Oscar.
Oh, I did not know that either.
Actor. Yeah. Yeah, he was, and you're right. Like, Mr. Miyagi, because of his backstory with Okinawa, and that, yes, he was born in California. But for me, like, the Mr. Miyagi character, it still to this day, when I watch The Karate Kid, it feels like he was almost like, I don't want to say a second dad to some of us growing up, but I really get this kind of kinship with him when I watch the movie again, because I was 15 when the movie came out, and he was a mentor, and he was so inspiring, and he really did help Daniel with the challenges that he had with Cobra Kai. And I don't know, I feel like very close to that character in terms of him being that kind of father figure to Daniel that I think he was to so many kids at that time in 1985. Another thing that made 80s movies great were these characters that gave us somebody to kind of rely on almost, even though they weren't real.
Well, and I'll echo what you said earlier to me, and it happened in TV as well. Just like these old mentors I said were in movies, and you remind me that they were throughout television, the same could be said for so many of the shows we watched as kids, whether it was Mr. Cunningham or even Mrs. Cunningham for that matter. They were these characters that were made that were almost the perfect representation of loving, caring, attentive parents. Because, I mean, my parents loved me. There was no lack of love in my household. But attentive, maybe not so much.
And to go on the educational side of it, when we were younger, a lot of your schooling, if you ever remember, schooling was very sit and get. It was, you had the teacher up front and the other thing. And it's kind of reminded me that all of our lives, like our television shows, were the opposite. We had the Cosby style families and the amazing families, like you said, to that point, but also in education, then Pat Morita and Mr. Miyagi gave us the opposite of what we were clearly getting in school. All of these mentors were now enlightened teachers who really taught by doing and taught by action, as opposed to what we were pretty used to getting.
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, he was probably the world's first STEM instructor because Daniel learned all that stuff hands-on by doing. Very cool, Shell.
Yeah, really good point. I hadn't thought about that one, so that's not the connection to anything in this particular episode. I do real quickly before we move on. I do want to go back to this idea of the 80s shows and how many of them had crossovers and how many of them had. I remember watching shows and you would wait to see kind of who like the guest star was going to be. Some shows were actually built around it, like Fantasy Island, for example, where you were waiting to see, maybe I know this person from somewhere else. And that was a big thing in the 80s. And it's not as much now. I do know, like, I was a huge fan of the Big Bang Theory. I really loved the show. And they did have guest appearances once in a while. But even a show like that ran, I think, 12 years, the guest appearances were minimal in terms of people that were either actors or actresses or characters new, like Bob Newhart, for example. He was in the Big Bang Theory in several episodes, but they don't do it in the same way that they did it back in the 80s.
And Chris, you always make the point about music, about how people wanted to be they wanted their songs played on movies and TV shows because that was a revenue stream for them. Whereas I think maybe sometimes we don't do it as much today with the guest stars because they have other revenue streams now. They have the ability. I don't need to guest star on the Big Bang Theory or any other show because I can have my own, even a B-level show on Netflix or Hulu, as opposed to, because they've got other revenue streams. So there wouldn't be a big competition to be out there and be seen the same way that it would have been in the past.
The guest stars, I've talked about it before. The guest stars and more to the point, the crossovers were a huge part of my childhood. I loved it when an actor appeared somewhere they weren't supposed to be. And every now and again, we were lucky and fortunate that not only was the actor appearing somewhere they weren't supposed to be, the character the actor was known for was also appearing. So, when Charlie's Angels appeared on the Love Boat during a crossover, they didn't appear, oh, look, there's Jacqueline Smith on Love Boat. No, she was actually the three of them stayed in character while being over from one Aaron Spelling production to another. And that made it really, really cool. And it starts from, the earliest one I remember is $6 Million Man Bionic Woman. I loved it when they would just combine episodes. That was everything for me as a kid.
Yeah, and that was something that, again, Shell made a great point about the music and how everybody wanted to be on the soundtrack and that people looked for opportunities. Actors and actresses looked for opportunities to get themselves on some of the shows that were popular or maybe made sense for, where they wanted to take the next evolution of who they were as an actor or an actress. Maybe their show was coming to an end and they were looking to see how they could move away from, that, what do we call that when people get stuck in the, we see them as only one character. And, what's that?
Typecast.
Yeah, they get typecast in that character and they're never able to really get out of it. So that was an interesting part. So as we wrap up Mr. Miyagi, I will say that, I'll ask you guys if you have like a favorite line or a favorite scene from Mr. Miyagi before we kind of wrap up here.
Chopsticks. Catching the fly with the chopsticks. And that's something we all tried. Usually it'd be pencils. We'd be sitting in school and you'd look over and your buddy's got 2 pencils in his hand and he's trying to catch a fly.
I forgot all about that part, but you know what? You are absolutely right. We did do that. We did do that. My favorite was the very first one I mentioned, though, was wax on, wax off. And it was iconic for me to hear that.
Yeah, so, Mr. Miyagi will always be with us, consistently getting referenced in pop culture today. My favorite was, don't forget to breathe, very important. And we're filming this right around the holidays. I know everybody's probably, this is going to come out after the holidays. But if you're listening to this and you remember the holiday is a very stressful time, there's a lot going on. Don't forget to breathe. It is very important. It's a great line from Mr. Miyagi. And I talk about that a lot, that, stress is like dehydration. By the time you realize you have it, it's too late. So just take a step back. Don't forget to breathe. Very important. It's a good lesson for life as well.
So jumping over to Sam Malone next, I got to start by saying that just like Pat Morita was in so many shows, I couldn't believe how many you named. Cheers, where Sam Malone was the owner of Cheers, and then not the owner of Cheers, then again the owner. But watching that door swing open, somebody was always coming through. They always had guest stars coming in and out. They had a huge cast of characters. They had the main characters, then they had people orbiting around them, that were still somewhat regular cast. And then they just had, you never knew who was going to walk in that door and sit at the bar at Cheers. And I always thought that was really cool.
There were only 3 characters that were actually in every single episode of Cheers. And that was Sam Malone, Carla, and Norm. Those are the only 3. And we think about some of the other characters, Cliff had to be on all of those. No, actually, those were the only 3 that were on every single episode. And I don't know if you know the backstory, or maybe you do part of the backstory with Sam Malone, how he's a relief pitcher for the Boston Red Sox. They actually had him as an ex-football player initially. And they didn't have him casting as Fred Dwyer. They may have had cast as Sam Malone. But when Ted Danson came in, his chemistry with Shelley Long when they read together was so good that they actually changed the backstory of the character Sam to fit more of his background.
I did know that, and what I think is amazing is there's so many characters from the 80s that we grew up with. And you've said before, Chris, about certain people, like it'd be hard to imagine anyone else in X role. And yet, whether it was Sam Malone or whether it was Marty McFly in Back to the Future, there were so many characters that became iconic in the end that were this close to being someone else. The other thing about Sam was that I think it's funny that he was a bartender, but because he was a recovering alcoholic, he never drank. I don't think there might have been an episode or 2 maybe as a story arc, but I actually don't remember him ever drinking in any of the episodes because of that. So here's a question for you guys. Mm-hmm. Cheers. Diane or Rebecca?
I know what the next follow-up question is going to be too.
I was more of a fan of Rebecca.
I was a Rebecca.
Me too. Okay. I ran this poll across my social media once, and Diane won like 2-1, and it shocked me because I always thought Rebecca had the better comedic timing. She had more of that self-deprecating humor where she would make fun of her character herself, and I just thought she was funnier in a more pathetic way, whereas Diane was more competent.
Mm-hmm. I found Diane annoying.
So did I.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the follow-up?
Woody or Coach? That's your follow-up question.
Ooh.
I knew
it was.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm going with Woody. I know there's a big section of people that believe it should be Coach, but it was Woody for me.
I'm right down the middle. They both were amazing. They both brought the same silliness for different reasons. They were both the dim-witted character, but I don't think I could pick between these two. Chris?
Yeah, I'm the same. They were both so good at that role. They brought different perspectives because they obviously the huge age difference. But Woody Harrelson, he's just a fantastic actor, and I think that's who I think of when I think of Cheers often. But if you go back and you watch the episodes with Coach, he had it nailed. He was perfect for that role. When you talk about somebody who couldn't actually play that specific role, they couldn't go out and get somebody that was his age to replace him. It wouldn't have worked.
All I can think of is Albania.
And I was thinking Kelly.
Yeah, and there's so much. How many times have you said, walked into a bar or somebody's walked in, one of your friends has said Norm, but they say your name instead. It's just, again, I go back to these kind of iconic characters and dialogue that still is pervasive in pop culture today and with most of us as well. And when we think about Sam Malone or Ted Danson, you know, he also took advantage of those opportunities within the 80s. And he was on, do you remember BJ and the Bear?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
He was on BJ and the Bear. He was on Trapper John MD, Laverne and Shirley. One of my favorites and super underrated show that I just loved was Benson. And he was on Benson. I don't think we talk about Benson enough. It was so good.
We don't. It Benson and Soap. I remember watching the two of those and loving them, and nobody else talked about them at the time. You remember Soap as well, I assume.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So here's another thing. I'm going to ruin your days. I'm all about ruining your day, and here it comes. How old do you think the actor that played Coach was when he passed away?
No, don't. Just don't.
I mean, I
Not
would
as
say,
bad as you think. He wasn't 30.
I would say,
62. There's my guess.
That's a good guess. Actually, Woody Harrelson today is 62. Coach when he died was 61.
wow.
So Woody Harrelson today is a year older than the character that played Coach was when he passed. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay, here's another ruiner for you. I'm younger than the two of you, so there.
I mean,
Not by much, mind you, but by a little.
61.
61.
Wow. Okay.
And I mean, Shell, you guessed 62, and that amazing. I don't even know how old Ted Danson must be right now. I don't even want to think about it.
I remember watching him in his latest shows, and it did something to me when he went gray. It was like he was a whole nother person, because I still saw him as Sam Malone. And when he went full on white gray, he looks very, very different.
He never went full on white gray.
Yeah, his hairpiece is as old as us.
His hairpiece might have gone full on white gray, but he has no hair to speak of.
Really?
Yeah,
Really,
oh,
he's
yeah.
worn a toupee since the earliest episodes of Cheers, forever.
Yeah,
I had no idea.
yeah. His hairpiece is older than you, Shell.
Okay.
And it's
Legitimately, I think it probably
awesome.
is.
I mean, the guy, he has a great hairpiece. He's not one that it jumps out at you.
No.
Was this common knowledge? Like, was I supposed to know
Yeah.
this? And I did not know this.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen a picture of him without it. I don't know if he's never been caught or if it just hasn't been. I've never seen what he looks like without it.
Huh.
He must just have a bad bald head, because
I would guess.
After
But he looks
Bruce
great
Willis-
with it.
after Bruce Willis, I thought, more guys embraced it, but some people's heads just don't work for it. I don't know. Like, it's just not. But yeah, his hairpiece has got to be close, pushing 50, I think, which would tell you probably how old he is. So I don't know how to continue this segment, because I just found out that Coach died at 61, which is like really freaking me out a little bit. Because I always thought he was like 90 in the show.
He was Dr. Ruth Sage, to throw back to another episode.
Right. The Golden Girls, and I think some of the actors in Cocoon were in their mid-50s too. So let's not
Wilford Brimley was 48 when they filmed Cocoon.
Listen, you
I can do these all day long.
Brimley on here. You are not allowed to bring up Wilford Brimley on here, because no. Mm-mm. I could live with the Golden Girls, but not Wilford Brimley. I'm not Wilford Brimley's age.
No, you're older than Wilford Brimley was. Embrace it. You look better. You look awesome. You look amazing. That's the thing. All these characters. Pat Morita looked older than we would have ever thought he was during those shows. Even Sam Malone. I remember being a kid and looking at him, and he was supposed to be this stud, this amazing bartender. And I get that bartenders, by and large, have this amazing gift of just being larger than life personalities. Every bartender's always been amazingly good looking, gifted, intelligent, funny, great storyteller. Bartenders are some of the best people in the world. But that aside,
wait. For those of you that don't know, Jan is a bartender, so that's. Yeah.
Why did it take me that long to figure out where this was going? That's what I would.
But as a kid, I remember thinking, why are all these women so attracted to him? I'm like, he's not that good looking. But it was the same thing as Arthur Fonzarelli. It was this confidence behind this character, and that's what it was. It wasn't that they were the best looking. Like later on in years, you'd have kids with the Ryan Reynolds or the Zac Efrons who are far better looking physically. But in our era, it wasn't about that. It was more about the confidence of the character. And Sam Malone had confidence in spades, more than he ever should have, probably.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. And that kind of almost felt like a lot of who Ted Danson was. We've talked about some characters and how they feel like the actor or actress themselves, and maybe there's a little bit of them in that. That it does feel like there's a little bit of that in Ted Danson as well, just the guy, Ted Danson. Who happened to also, by the way, I forgot about this too, but he was in Creepshow, the original Creepshow.
Love Creepshow.
I love Creepshow too, and I'm gonna have to go back and watch it now because I can't remember who he was, but he was in Creepshow, and of course, Three Men and a Baby. But when it comes to the guest appearances too, like Taxi, Magnum PI, The Simpsons, Frasier. I mean, Frasier's one of my favorites. The Amazing Spider-Man. I didn't realize how many people were on The Amazing Spider-Man back in the day. But apparently there were a lot of them when I was doing this research as well. And we've talked a little bit too, I don't know what you guys think, but for me, I feel like the Cheers ending was one of the most perfect send-offs for a show. We've talked about this in the past, I think, about how some shows miss the mark on the ending, some hit it. And him saying at the very end with the person knocking on the door, who I believe was the creator, I think the creator of Cheers or one of the main writers of Cheers, knocks on the door and you just hear, you hear Sam say, "Sorry, we're closed." And it's it gives me chills when I think about it because it was a show that I watched with my dad. And when it came to an end, it was one of those moments I talk about how if I go back in my youth, a lot of the shows were almost like milestones for me. My life changed as a show ended. And that's one of those shows where I had gone from 12 years old to 23 years old. I had really evolved when Cheers was on.
Do you remember what happened right before the person comes down to the door and he's told we're closed? Do you remember what precedes that scene?
I don't remember. He was in there by himself, right?
Yeah. So he walks across the bar and there's a painting or a picture of Tecumseh. I think that's who it is. There's a Native American, and that was the actor that played Coach. That was either his painting or his favorite painting on the set. There was a very real connection between that painting and the character that played Coach. So Sam goes up to it and just straightens it, and that's just a nod to that actor that had passed because he was such a big part of the early years of Cheers. And that's the moment that gave me chills because I had known that prior to that moment. And as soon as I saw him go over to that painting, I'm like, that to this day, that gives me goosebumps. That gives me chills. I thought it was a very sweet and beautiful ending. And fans of the podcast will hear me say this often, that my favorite thing about movies and television is when they give the viewer what they want. And Cheers gave us the ending that we wanted. It wasn't, a literally perfect ending. There was no irony involved. There was no great controversy. You've enjoyed the show for this many years. Here's the ending you would have wished for. And I love that.
Mm-hmm. Well, we were sitting there on the stools next to everyone. We identified with every single person there who ever came in. And what I find really neat about the entire show, Cheers, too, was that for the most part, other than going off set for a few things, I mean, the entire thing was filmed right there at the bar. It was the entire show was just the bar. And I don't know, I find that neat when they don't go off on location, too often.
Yeah. And it perhaps had arguably we could probably have a whole conversation on the greatest spin-offs from a series, because it is difficult to spin off of a series that was so successful. But, Frasier was, you could argue, as successful or more successful than Cheers. And that just doesn't really happen that often from big shows
ask
like
Joey.
that. Yeah, that's
ask
right.
Matt LeBlanc about that.
Yeah, that's right. That was on my mind, actually. Joey was one of the ones I was thinking about. It's difficult. It's difficult when that, it's an ensemble cast like that. So as we wrap up here on Ted Danson and Sam Malone, what are your thoughts?
My only other thought, too, real quickly, is number one, I have a special affinity for Ted Danson, for Sam Malone specifically, and for Cheers because the years that was playing, to your point, Chris, my parents owned a bar growing up, but then we also had one in Buffalo when I was older, and I was 18, 19, 20 years old behind the bar watching Cheers. Like that would be the start to our night. My friends would come out, our regulars would come out, and we'd be sitting around the bar watching Cheers. So like we're at a bar while watching the bar, and that was cool. And then number two, I just didn't want to neglect to mention things that Ted Danson himself in the movies like Three Men and a Baby that were a huge part of our 80s as well, because he went from the small screen onto the big screen and didn't leave Cheers to do it, whereas Shelley Long left behind the character of Diane specifically at the time because she wanted to be successful in movies. And you can argue whether she was or wasn't. She had a few. But I think it was pretty cool that Ted Danson was able to grow this huge career and still stayed on the small screen at the same time.
Yeah.
And his character was so iconic on Cheers that even when he crossed over into the movies, he played that character so well. Maybe that confidence bled through because even when he was in like Three Men and a Baby and Three Men and a Little Lady, he wasn't Sam Malone gone on to make a movie. He was a completely new character, and that's something that's hard to do because he wasn't typecast, and I think that goes to show how strong of a role he had as Sam, as just this confident character and in and of himself. He wasn't Ted Danson, he was Sam Malone in that. He wasn't a character playing Sam Malone.
And even Kirstie Alley, I mean, you shocked me when you said I forgot about Woody, also on Cheers, also was able to have a big film career with,
Huge.
during Cheers and after Cheers. Kirstie Alley, who we just lost this year, who passed away this year. This was a tough year for celebrities we watched. But one of my favorite movies was Look Who's Talking from that time period. Just real fond memories of all that stuff. And that all bled from Cheers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then, of course, John Ratzenberger, who played Cliff, who I think has the largest box office of any actor in history.
His voice is in like every Pixar thing you could possibly think of. You sit there and you're like, wait a minute, that's Cliff. That's Cliff playing the snowman over there, or that's Cliff playing this character in all those Pixar movies. And that might be purposeful. His voice was iconic, but that also might be purposeful when they have that adult humor mixed in with the kid humor. We get to know that's Cliff.
Okay, so let's move on to our final segment so then everybody get close to getting your decoder rings out because this is going to be the final piece of the puzzle here. Mrs. Nora Bing. Mrs. Nora Bing was Chandler's mom, played by Morgan Fairchild, and she was just in a handful of episodes. A couple of episodes that she was actually on, a couple that she was mentioned. The most famous one was probably, either at was it Chandler's engagement party or wedding, I should say, or was when Ross or she seduced Ross or Ross seduced her, whatever happened. That was just a great episode as well. So Morgan Fairchild, when you think of her, like first thoughts.
So my first thoughts are just that she, especially during the 80s, there was a period of time where if your parents let you stay up late enough and you were quiet on the living room floor, trying not to draw any attention to yourself, then your parents would sometimes let you stay up till 9, 10, 11 o'clock. And in those later hours when we were trying to be invisible so we could watch TV with our parents, that's where Morgan Fairchild lived. She was on a bunch of nighttime soap operas. She was on this one called Flamingo Road. She was on one that was like models. I can't remember the name of that one specifically right now, but that was her thing. I think she might have even been on a story arc on Melrose Place. She was just this attractive, intelligent, powerful woman. And in the 80s, they loved putting them in the storylines because that was the era of Alexis. And, when women became not just the eye candy, the window dressing, they drove the plots. You could think of Knots Landing and Donna Mills. She took those types of roles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I thought about her in that role as well, but what I was surprised by when I did my research was that she was only on Dallas for one episode, and Falcon Crest for one season. And I always thought about her being a character that was on those for multiple seasons all the time. And that wasn't the case. I mean, you mentioned a few others, of course, that were more nighttime soap operas as well. But I was really surprised because I always thought of her as like the quintessential iconic 80s nighttime soap opera character.
And she was, but that was the thing. Like Flamingo Road was hers. That was a piece that she actually was the J.R. Ewing on that.
Mm-hmm.
So they tried to, and Models Inc. I think it might have been. I'm having Paper Dolls. That's what
Paper Dolls.
Okay,
Paper Dolls.
Yeah.
So those were her vehicles, and for whatever reason, no fault to her, I'm sure. It is very bizarre that I remember that. I'm just. Of all the times for my synapses to fire and make connections, it's on Morgan Fairchild in her nighttime. There's the brain is a very strange muscle. I don't know, but yeah. So she was the queen of those things, but it was they took her off of Dallas, they took her off of Falcon Crest to drive her own show, and then those happened to only last a couple seasons apiece.
Yeah, and as Nora Bing, I even though her character was just in a few episodes, she was so good because there are just some people, there are some actors and actresses that just, it's hard to take your eyes off of them even when they're in a group of people. And it wasn't just because she's beautiful, but they just command that particular scene. And one of my favorite lines that she had as Nora Bing was when she was talking to Rachel, because Rachel was thinking about, she wanted to be, because if you don't know about Nora Bing was a graphic adult romance author. She wrote erotica, and she had sold 100 million copies or so I think they had said on one of the episodes. But Rachel was like, how do I get started? She said, you start with half a dozen European cities, throw in 30 euphemisms of male genitalia, and bam, you've got yourself a book. And it's just she delivered it much better than me, but such a great line and hilarious, of course, as Friends was.
My favorite Nora Bing moment on Friends was the Thanksgiving episode where Chandler's describing why one of the many reasons he hates Thanksgiving, and she's basically making some reference to Chandler's father being with the pool boy, at which point the pool boy, the house boy, at which point, of course, he bends over and says, "More turkey, Mr. Chandler."
I do remember that sometimes. Oh, I love when you jog my memory like this.
Her first job was actually as a double for Faye Dunaway during the filming of Bonnie and Clyde. Yeah. And she, guest appearances as well. Again, going back to the 80s, Happy Days, Kojak. Talk about a good bald guy, right? Kojak. Barnaby Jones, The Bob Newhart Show, Mork and Mindy. Simon and Simon, which is one that one we don't talk about enough. I think there was a really great detective show in the 80s. Of course, The Love Boat she was on, Murder, She Wrote, and so many others.
Yeah, I think if you were a big star in the 80s and didn't somehow end up on Love Boat, you were almost being shunned. You'd be like telling your agent, what am I doing so horribly wrong that I've yet to be on either The Love Boat or Fantasy Island? Because so many seasons, so many episodes. I mean, Charo must have been on like 30 times. But to be somebody that never got to coochie.
Charo. Oh, wait. She's one of them people that annoyed me like Urkel annoys you. I really couldn't stand Charo.
Do you know what her coochie was?
Her coochie? No, I don't know her coochie.
Well, because that's what
she said.
That was her tagline. That's what she said. She'd always go coochie.
I don't
coochie.
remember that.
That's what she was famous for. It was her dog.
Yeah.
Not her cat. Referred to her dog.
One of the things I wanted to mention about Morgan Fairchild that's kind of fascinating to me, again, doing this research and the things that we find, she did have a connection to Matthew Perry before Friends. And when they were talking about the role of his mom, she thought, I'm not old enough to play his mom. The reality is that when she came on the set as his mom, and she was only 19 years older than him, so she could have been his mom, but 19 years, he said, I met you before. And she said, how's that? How did you meet me? And his dad was actually on the show Flamingo Road, and he visited the set. His dad played the sheriff and was also on Falcon Crest. So he had actually met her before as a kid. Yeah,
The
Morgan
other thing
Freeman.
I'd say about
Wow.
Morgan Fairchild is as beautiful as she was, and she was in an era of the Heathers, Heather Locklear, Heather Thomas,
Thomas.
just these model, beautiful poster women that actually became posters, right? That came up.
Mhm.
She was that level of beautiful, and yet that wasn't her shtick. She was
Mhm.
this powerful, intelligent, confident, dangerous woman who happened to be beautiful. And like I
Mhm.
said, you can put Donna Mills in that same category. That was something that was very, very cool about the 80s. And I think as we diminish some of those nighttime soap operas and say, oh, that was just garbage television, and it was just women catfighting in the pool, and there was that aspect to it, but it really did flip the script, and in so many ways better parts for women as a result, more money for women as a result, because
Mhm.
those women drove the conversation that no, Larry Hagman's making X, I'm that caliber, and Joan Collins, and they had these conversations with producers and literally changed things so that when the Heather Locklears of Melrose Place came up, and they benefited from these women and what they did. And I thought that was super. And it continues to this day. She's breaking stereotypes because she's still making movies. As we're recording this, she's making a movie with some other older actresses, making fun of the fact that they're beautiful women who've aged. She's continuing to push the envelope and say, no, I'm not gone yet. It doesn't matter that I'm 70. I can still do this. And I think that's really cool.
I feel like even though sometimes those nighttime trashy soap operas from the day, they really weren't trashy though at the time. They are the Real Housewives of New Jersey and the Real Housewives of, it's the same show, only now we use them as reality series. It
Mm.
is, in a way.
I mean, the only thing I would say about that is that the nighttime soap operas with the Morgan Fairchilds of the world, those were actually talented people.
Oh, by far. Oh, I'm not diminishing their work by any means, but I'm just saying that now.
You did.
Yeah.
You diminished.
But now we look at, we've replaced those high caliber women, like John said, we've replaced those high caliber women with a lot of talent and a lot to bring to the table. And then we've replaced it with, I don't know, really trashy stuff, if you ask me.
I'm not sure where we go from here with how these housewives of whatever became stars. I just feel like we're close to the end of the world. It's almost over because we've elevated people like that to stardom.
We're almost to the point where three idiots could come together and just start their own podcast expecting someone to be watching and listening. I mean, I don't know where we're going from here.
What the hell would people be thinking to do something like that, right? That would be so dumb. So dumb.
Ridiculous.
I mean, a bartender and an author and an actual housewife. So, I mean, that would just be dumb.
Hey, we're a hell of a lot better than those housewives. I guarantee you that. No question. It's not close. It's not close.
Not close at all.
Not close.
I'll catfight if you want to. We'll get this podcast going.
Those were some of the best scenes, though, ever. And the best thing about it is if you go back and watch it now, the one thing that Hollywood lacked in the 80s was stunt women. Go back and watch some of those catfight scenes now, and the up-close images are Linda Evans and Joan Collins, and then they back away, and it's two men with wigs rolling around in dresses.
That's right.
It's not even close to being passable. I mean, it is hilarious. Wonder Woman did that too. The Wonder Woman television series. She did have some stunt women on there, but there were some of the stunts where it's a dude wearing her outfit and a wig.
Can I get you two to put on a wig in the next episode, and we could do a cat fight, like I said.
Can you get us to? That's like a Tuesday afternoon.
That would be entertainment.
So before we finish up, the last thing I have to add to Morgan Fairchild thing is that if there was any of us, of the three of us, to come up with the topics you came up with today, Chris, the first two, all you, the third, you shocked me. I didn't see that one coming. When you were listing them off, I'm like, Pat Morita, Mr. Miyagi, got it, cool. Sam Malone, cool bartender. Ted Danson, got it. Nora Bing, Morgan Fairchild. And I'm just like, huh?
Eh?
Yeah. Well, and that's where, it gets interesting when the connection comes in, because all three of them are connected and in some way, shape, or form. And they all three, I'll say that the actors and actress or actors, all three are connected in some way. And it all does go back to the 80s, of course, and how the three of them are connected.
Are we on the connection now? Are we taking a?
Yeah, why not? I think we.
Yeah, I'll go back really quickly. So we have Mr. Miyagi, Pat Morita. We have Sam Malone, Ted Danson, and we have Mrs. Nora Bing, played by Morgan Fairchild. And and so those three are connected in some way back to the 80s. Think about what we talked about throughout all three of them, and what I kept kind of going back to. I'll give you a little bit of a hint there.
I know that there's some, John's probably going to get this one. I know that there's some movie, some show that the three of them guest appeared on, and I'm missing that movie or show or connection because I've heard Happy Days with two of them. I've heard, all these shows and guest appearances that you're talking about, but of course it could be a red herring, just like John likes to throw out at us. But that's my guess. But what that movie, show, or thing may be, I have no idea.
So for me, the connection is literally connections. It's the fact that the era itself was, we talked about it, a guest star golden era where everybody was everywhere. And these three actors specifically did a lot of that. You could argue Morgan Fairchild made a career out of it. You can't point to one show that she was a 9 to 5 that was successful that went on. And yet you can't argue that she wasn't successful, but she did it in small roles in series that didn't last very long. She was the penultimate, version of the Love Boat thing. I would not be surprised to find out that all three of these people were on Love Boat at one time or another. That I can almost guarantee. If I look back, I'll find episodes of Love Boat that all three of them were on. So for me, that's the connection. If I can think of one, it's that in and of itself. The connection is their ability to connect.
Maybe they were all on an episode of Love Boat, John. Maybe there was that one episode.
I don't think they were all on it necessarily at the same time, although that's possible, but I could probably find them all on Love Boat or Fantasy Island or both.
Mm-hmm. So you're really close, actually. And I'm glad that you got close. I will tell you, this is a difficult one because you would have to really know, you'd have to know this particular show inside and out. I happen to, but I thought it was cool, and it gave us an opportunity to talk about two really great actors and a great actress, and also three really great characters as well. The connection is, yes, that all three, because we talk about the 80s and how the 80s had all these guest stars and guest appearances, all three were on the same show, which I mentioned.
Magnum P.I.
Yes, Magnum P.I. They were all guest stars on Magnum P.I.
It just came to me at the end. I remembered the one with Pat Morita, and then I remember the one with Ted Danson. So I'm taking credit. I shouted it before you said it.
You got it. They all three were on Magnum P.I., which I have to say was my top 3 TV show in the 80s. I wanted to be Magnum. I loved everything about that show with TC and Rick and, Robin Masters Higgins. And when we talk about the 80s, if you go research how many people were on Magnum P.I., it's incredible. Frank Sinatra had a guest appearance on Magnum P.I., which tells you all you really kind of need to know. If your show could get Frank Sinatra on in a guest appearance, you're probably doing okay. And so I was a huge Magnum P.I. fan. Thursday nights, if it was 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, I was in front of the TV. The theme song, dun, 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 dun. I mean, it's just a great intro. It's one of the best intros, one of the most iconic theme songs, with just an iconic character that could, as we've talked about in the past, who else could have been? I know they've done a reboot, but let's be honest. Like, who could have been the original Magnum P.I.? And he almost wasn't, or I should say was for a short time, because he really wanted the Indiana Jones role, and that ended up with Harrison Ford. Everything worked out because Indiana Jones is Harrison Ford, Magnum PI is Tom Selleck. Who could have played those roles other than the two of them?
Well, and to your point, like as you're talking to Shell's point from episode after episode of connections we don't, I just keep hearing other connections. Like I watched Magnum on Thursdays, which became the home of Friends on Thursdays. And Tom Selleck went from Magnum, and he was one of those characters that recurred on Friends, and they just cross back and forth. And there's just other connections that show themselves. And to the reboot of Magnum, I can't say that I've given it a shot. But Tom Selleck is so Magnum that I couldn't watch it. The guy could be doing an amazing job of it, but I could not force myself to watch a reboot because it couldn't possibly be good enough.
In some ways, I'm glad they bring these reboots about, though, because maybe it takes this generation now and makes them go backwards and look at the older one. If they really enjoy the new one, go ahead back and look at the older one. So I appreciate it, though. You're right. I would never watch it.
Yeah, and your talk about the crossover, and it's so, I mean, two episodes of Murder, She Wrote crossed over with Magnum PI because they were both in Hawaii, and the two episodes were where Magnum was framed for murder. So it was really interesting to see that as well, how that crossover between Murder, She Wrote and Magnum PI. And there were some really interesting fun facts. As much as I knew about Magnum PI that I did actually not know is that his outfit is actually at the Smithsonian. His wardrobe. That's, you have to be at a certain level of show from an iconic perspective to have the main character's outfit and everybody know it so well that even if they didn't have a sign on it, most people would know that's Magnum PI. Mm-hmm. That's his outfit.
I will reverse course a little bit on what I just said because I was thinking about it, and I like Shell's point that these shows rebooting gives another opportunity to revisit the character, if not the actor. And we're talking about these crossovers. It reminded me that I actually really loved the Hawaii Five-0 reboot. And I remember watching the original as a kid, and I gave it a shot and really liked it. And to their credit, there were crossover episodes between the new Magnum and the new Hawaii Five-0 that I did watch those crossovers, and it did. It made me feel like a kid in the 80s. I'm like, this is that same cool feeling. And I like that they did that.
And I'm trying to think, I can't think of what show or movie I've recently seen this on, but it was like a reboot where the actor from the original show made a guest appearance on the reboot, whether it be a movie or a television show. I know that's happened a couple of times, and I enjoy seeing that.
So I also want to mention, like we talked a little bit about earlier with Cheers and great endings and how Magnum PI was supposed to end in season 7, where Magnum was dead. And I remember that episode. He had been shot. He was laying in the bed, and he kind of like, they showed him often walking into heaven, walking into the clouds, and that was it. And people got really upset, and the network actually did not want it to end that way. I don't know why they actually did it the way they did, but they came with a season 8 and wrapped it up, I think, the way people wanted to, which was that Magnum was still alive, and he was, and that's where we kind of learned a little bit about Higgins and Robin Masters, potentially. So I'm a huge fan of the show, and again, going back to the kind of the connection here, that Morgan Fairchild, Pat Morita, and Ted Danson all had guest appearances on Magnum PI. But again, if you go back and you look at 80s shows, that was happening all over the place. To Shell's point earlier, we've talked about how musicians always wanted to be on soundtracks, and actors and actresses wanted to make as many guest appearances as possible. And a lot of times those guest appearances led to new opportunities and new shows. We've talked about that with Mork and Mindy and Happy Days and shows like that as well. So it's a pretty cool time.
I love what John said about how Morgan Fairchild, you really can't pin her down to having had this one iconic role. And yes, she was pervasive all in everything. And it hadn't occurred to me, but I really like that point.
And Morgan Fairchild has a great name. I mean,
that can't be a real
really
name.
Like, I don't know.
That's got to be a stage name.
I mean, you would think it would be because it's kind of too perfect.
That at all?
Almost.
It's almost too perfect.
I did not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be curious to know. Like there
Her
there
real
are
name-
some names that people are born with.
Her real name is Edna Smothersburg.
Get out of
You're
here.
lying.
That's so ridiculous.
I'm catching on real quick here, you know. I didn't catch on to the bar joke, but I caught on to Edna. Okay.
Edna Smothersburg.
Where did that come from?
All right. Her real name, Patsy Ann McClenny. That's almost as bad as Edna Smothersburg.
Yeah, that's pretty close. Yeah.
Yeah.
Patsy Ann McClenny. There it is.
Doesn't roll off the tongue like Morgan Fairchild.
No.
But I mean, Morgan, like to your point, it is. It's a soap opera name. It's like Morgan Fairchild. It's absolutely.
It is.
As soon as you hear it, you know damn well that's not her name.
Yeah. So this week's connection a little bit different, I think. Not some of our connections. I don't want to say they've been a little more obvious because I haven't gotten any of them, but maybe there's a connection that is a little more tangible for the audience. But I enjoyed this one because it allowed us to cover a couple different areas. One, again, as I mentioned before, 3 great actors, actresses. 2, this idea of the crossovers and the guest appearances in the 80s. And then 3, I got to talk about one of my favorite shows of all time and one that I think is, absolutely iconic in Magnum PI.
That was a great episode. I loved all 3 topics. I'm surprised I had as much as I did have to say about Morgan Fairchild. Surprised / embarrassed. But totally awesome. And I think with this episode, as I am absolutely taking the W on figuring it out, I think that puts me in the lead.
Here we go.
What?
Oh,
Are you guys
I knew it
putting
was
me up
coming.
again?
I was just like, okay, I'm going to sit and wait for it. No. John, you definitely. I think I'm going to call this 1.5. 1.5. How about that? Can we give you 1.5?
No, I think it's 2.
You
I
got
think this is
1
2.
for sure. Is it 2?
I'm
Is
up
it
to
2
2. I think this is my second.
2. Okay.
If anything,
Okay.
2.5. I almost got the one that you did with Charlie's Angels. I was close, but definitely puts me in the lead at whatever number it is. And I don't know where you fall in, but it's definitely you're the middle child on this. And Chris, you've got a big goose egg so far, right?
I do. I'm the Joey Tribbiani of the bunch. I have trouble figuring things out.
I'm the joke.
Okay, we're gonna have to keep a score of this at the end of the year. We'll have to do a special episode.
You don't think I'm keeping
that?
score?
We'll have to do a special episode at the end of the year.
On that note, I just want to, as I sign off, say thank you to everybody once again for the amazing comments, the listening, the sharing, the subscribing, and the support that you guys are giving all of us. For John Catrides, saying see you guys next time.
And I'm Rochelle O'Black, Gen X Shell. See you next time as well.
And I'm Chris Clews. Stay rad, everybody.